Okay, I think we'll get going. So welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening for this innovation webinar. My name's Hayley Luxton. I'm the Senior Research Impact and Intelligence Manager here at Prostate Cancer UK. And I just have a few bits of housekeeping to go through before we go on to the main event. We've got three fantastic speakers for you this evening. So hello and welcome. Tonight's topic is going to be, we're going to focus on the clinical trial called STAMPEDE. I'm not going to steal any of the speakers' thunders, and I'm going to let Ben talk to you all about the trial. But like I said, we've got three great presentations this evening, each lasting around 10 minutes. We're going to take one presentation at a time, leaving 5 minutes for questions and answers for each speaker. Please feel free to use the chat function now to introduce yourself if you'd like to. It's great for us to see who's here. We'll keep the audience microphones muted, but so please use the chat function to ask your questions, and we'll come back to them during the Q&A section after each speaker. If we do miss a question, don't worry. Please email it to us. I think there's going to be an email address popped into the chat now, and then we'll get back to you after the event. We'll make sure that everyone's question gets answered. If everyone's comfortable with this, we'd like to record the session, and my colleague Sarah is going to hit record. We're just going to record it so that those that can't join us this evening can watch us on catch up. And at the end of the webinar, we're going to be sharing a survey in the chat and via email. And please, if we can ask you to take the time to complete this, because feedback really is invaluable. It really helps us shape these events so that they maintain really relevant to you, our audience. So if you've got any technical issues tonight, please contact the same email that's just gone into the chat. And to kick us off, I thought it might be useful just to give a little bit of background of why we're talking about STAMPEDE this evening. So I don't want to give too much away because we've got some fantastic speakers, but I'm sure you're aware of STAMPEDE. It's been a massively huge and massively successful trial. It was largely funded through Cancer Research UK, and as a funder of research, we funded some sub-analyses of data from STAMPEDE. And as part of this, I get the great privilege of go to the translational research group meetings that STAMPEDE hold regularly. And I've seen two of the speakers tonight present some of their data, and when I saw the data, I just felt very strongly that this had to be shared with health professional network, and so this is why we're here this evening. So I'm going to hand over now to our first speaker, Professor Noel Clarke, and he's going to give you some background on STAMPEDE. So I'll hand over to you, Noel. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Okay. You should be able to hear me now, so thank you, Hayley.
We can.
It's a great pleasure to be here and to be able to talk to you about STAMPEDE. STAMPEDE is 20 years old this year, and it has been, as Hayley said, a success which has really exceeded our expectations over the years. We started some time ago, back in 2002, actually, and just like many of the great trials and studies that have been done, it started with a discussion in the bar at a prostate cancer meeting. And you can see the pictures of the various individuals who are involved predominantly in setting up STAMPEDE right at the inception, planning this between 2002 and 2004. From left to right, as you look at the screen, Nick James, who's the principal investigator, Malcolm Mason, who was the co-principal investigator with me, who was Professor of Clinical Oncology in Cardiff, has now retired.
Sorry to interrupt you, Noel. The slides aren't moving. We're still on the title slide. Sorry.
Let's try that again.
There you are.
Try that again. So 2002 to 2004, you can see the pictures of the various instigators of the trial. There's Nick James on the far left as you look at the screen, who's the principal investigator. Malcolm Mason immediately to his right, co-PI with me, further to the right, David Durnley, formerly Professor of Clinical Oncology, that's Radiation Oncology at Royal Marsden, now retired. And then two statisticians, Matt Sides, who was then a pretty junior statistician at the Medical Research Council, the MRC, now Professor of Statistics, and Max Palmer, who was probably the main driver of the principle behind the STAMPEDE study. The unique feature of STAMPEDE was this, that it was a multi-arm, multi-trial design, and this had never been done before. So conventionally, in assessing a trial, one starts off with a phase 1 and phase 2 study, which is on your left as you look at the screen. And the phase 1 study is a trial of toxicity. Phase 2 is an expanded arm of the study. And then if the agent under test or the procedure under test comes through all that, it goes on to phase 3 and phase 4 testing. And that process takes at least 15 years. And on the way, quite a number of new technologies, drugs and so on, will drop out. The principle behind STAMPEDE, the multi-arm, multi-stage bit, was that we would take a control therapy here, arm C, and we would run with that. And then we would compare various things alongside it, control +1, +2, +3, +4. And that foreshortens the time taken to complete a suite of trials all along. So instead of taking 15 years to test a combination A versus B, we would test A versus B versus C versus D versus E, and we will be able to do that within a period of something like 5 to 10 years. And during that time, we could also add on extra arms. And this was quite unique. This had not been done before. It's since been adopted around the world for various clinical trials. The latest, probably most well publicized one was the major trial in COVID-19 called the Recovery Trial, which took its format directly from the STAMPEDE study. And of the 16,400 men who've joined the trial to date, more than 3,000 site staff have been involved. So it's a huge endeavour, which has been a pan-UK endeavour. And it was voted the world's best cancer trial by the Statistical Society in 2019, and was highlighted by The Guardian and Cancer Research UK in their 120 years of cancer research as one of the major leading trials in cancer. So it's been a huge success, way, way beyond our expectations. This is what it looks like. We started off looking at the screen on the left. You can see arms A, B, C, D, and E. And these were the standards of care, which we started to run in around 2005, and we ran till 2013 and reported those. And on the way, we dropped out one of those arms and we put in another arm. And we've since put in new arms here, and this is arm H, arm L, and so on, right the way down to the current day. And as the trial has developed, we've reported the various outcomes from the trial. We've also been able to adapt things so we can now cross-correlate the outcome data with what's called hospital episode statistics data. We started that in 2018. Every time a patient goes into hospital, has something done, it's recorded. And so we can monitor our patients in the trial very accurately. And we've updated that in March 2021. And Ashwin, who is going to talk later, will give you some indication as just how effective that is. We've reported this recently. Nick Jones and I wrote a short article to commemorate the 20 years of STAMPEDE, setting out how a platform trial works. And if you wanted to read that, the reference is there on the paper. Now, what's the impact of STAMPEDE been? Well, it's been considerable. We started off in 2005. We had over 12,000 participants in 120 hospitals pretty quickly. We have changed the international standard of care on at least 5 occasions. And we've improved the overall survival in prostate cancer sufferers by between 3 and 7 years. And that really is something which makes us very proud. But one thing which we're going to focus on for this webinar is what's happened alongside these changes in practice, which really have been quite dramatic, and that is the translational research arm. once again, this started out as a discussion in a bar at a cancer meeting, this time in Chicago and not York, as was the original. And these people got together, Nick James, Dave Durnley, Malcolm Mason, Max Palmer, Matt Sides and myself. And we decided that it was fundamentally important to try to understand the processes of prostate cancer development and progression, and to understand how the new treatments that we were testing actually worked. And so in the first instance, what we did was make an arrangement to get all the clearance and the ethical permission to make an application to have all the tissue from the prostate cancer patients that had been biopsied and was stored in pathology labs up and down the United Kingdom into one central area so that we could study it. And that has been a phenomenal success, and it's been coordinated by Gert Attard and his team. Gert is now one of the senior investigators in STAMPEDE. And the whole thing has expanded. So we now have a translation research program, which looks at informatics, that's data, the biomedical research group looking at tissue and genetics and DNA, the biomedical imaging group, or the big team, which Ashwin's going to talk about, which has centralized all the images from STAMPEDE patients, which has been a huge effort. And then under Nick James at the Institute of Cancer Research at the Royal Marsden, radiation studies and studies relating to PSMA, modern scanning and so on. So this is a big, big effort. And I'm only going to show you a little bit of this in some data. But before I do, this is the kind of team, and this is not the whole team, but on an annual basis, we have a research fellows and senior researchers meeting. You can see David Durnley, Nick James, myself and Gert Attard. But importantly, we have, let me just go back. We have numerous people from pathology, from data people at the MRC, fundamentally important, research fellows like Ashwin, Craig Jones here, all of whom are providing a huge intellectual input and drive into this internationally important project. Now, as an illustration, these are 3 other studies which we presented at the European Society of Medical Oncology, one of the premier meetings in the world, which sets the tone for how prostate cancer and other cancers are managed. And you can see that we have major genomics and genetics publications. We have a major publication on how prostate cancer obstructs the kidneys. We have a major publication on how treatments for prostate cancer affect musculoskeletal integrity, and Ash will have a talk to you about this in more detail. I'm going to show you a couple of bits from the genetics program. What you can see in this slide is the sort of effort that's involved in pulling together tissue from all the centres around the UK who have been involved, from Northern Ireland, Scotland, and throughout England. So the tissue from each pathology lab is centralised in London. It is categorised, sliced, stored, and studied. And this produces things like this. These are genetic maps. And this kind of work is done by people you see in the pictures at the bottom, who are a combination of pathologists, research scientists, under the aegis of the STAMPEDE trial management group. And in this circumstance, led by Gert Attard, with the rest of the STAMPEDE team. And this paper was one of the first of the major publications which came out from the genetics team, looking at the individual genetic characteristics. Now, what you see here, which is a somewhat complicated paper, which was published in Genomic Medicine recently, each line here represents the survival of a group of patients within the STAMPEDE trial. And this is looking at the disruption of the genome in the prostate cancer tissue using what's called whole genome sequencing. You can see with the dots in the map of the UK where the tissues come from, and here we've been able to substratify each individual group of patients, whether they had localized disease, advanced disease, and we cross-correlated that with our data from the imaging group in Manchester. And what we can see is that there are different types of prostate cancer which have got different prognoses. This particular group, for example, seems to survive for a longer period of time and has a different gene profile than this group, who have got much more aggressive disease. And we're beginning to understand this much, much better because we can analyze our tissue using advanced scientific techniques and translating that with outcome. Now, to take this a stage further, this is a paper which won a prize at the European Society meeting recently, looking at artificial intelligence. And instead of breaking up the tissue, getting the DNA out, this was simply using the prostate cancer biopsy tissue from the patient, looking at it in a conventional way down a microscope and measuring the characteristics using AI-based programs. And what we were able to show, and Charles Parker was the research pathologist doing this work, is that in patients who had M0, that's to say clinically localized disease, we know what the outcomes are, but by applying AI-based techniques, it was possible to break this group up into those, for example, with localized disease on the left here and metastatic disease on the right here, into those who've got really aggressive disease, where we can intensify treatment and try out new things, and those who've got disease which is really much more slow growing. And in a way, we can potentially cut down the amount of treatment these patients have and reduce their toxicity. Now, the imaging biomarker program, I'm not going to show any more than this, but we're looking at disease burden, that's to say the extent of disease and where it lies. We're looking at imaging biomarkers to see what the scans look like and how we can interpret those in terms of the aggressiveness of disease and the toxicity of treatments, which is really, really important. And we link all this together with the teams in London so that we've got effectively a triangulation of the whole effort, which is a major, major achievement in a trial. And you can see the kind of team that we have to put together in these areas. You've seen the UCL team, that's the London team. This is the Manchester team with research fellows, with Ashwin Sachdeva, who's one of the key leaders of this, along with me, scientists, radiologists, and so on. So this is a big effort that's going in to working all this out. Now, I say we've got a 20-year anniversary for STAMPEDE 1. Of course, all the original STAMPEDE investigators are getting a bit older, and you can see that from the state of the pictures that I've just shown you. And we've now got STAMPEDE 2 on the books. This is about to start in 2024. There's a huge amount of work gone into this and a considerable amount of funding. And what this is concentrating on, and I'll go through this relatively quickly, is metastatic disease divided into those who've got low volume disease, who may be eligible for radiotherapy to the metastatic sites, and those who've got multifocal high volume disease, where we know that radiotherapy to the primary metastatic sites is unlikely to be effective. So we're going to switch these. We now have arm S and arm P, and they will substratify in this way. So patients in arm S will have what's called stereotactic body radiation to the up to 5 metastatic sites, including the primary, or standard of care. And then there are a variety of options for them. And similarly, in patients who've got higher volume, more aggressive disease, we will have this combination, which is lutetium PSMA and what are called PARP inhibitor drugs for those who've got genetic mutations. So this is an exciting prospect. It's going to run for the next 10 or 15 years, and we hope that it's going to be as successful as STAMPEDE 1. We certainly have got a lot of enthusiasm for this trial, and we're confident that it will start to yield further information over and above that which we've all got already. So I'd like to acknowledge the patients who joined the trial, their families and friends who supported them. There were 3,000 staff at near 120 hospitals who've been involved. The supporters in a financial and logistics terms, Sanofi, Novartis, Janssen, these big pharmaceutical firms, and PC UK, and of course, our major UK funders, Medical Research Council and Cancer Research UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noel. Just a reminder that if anyone has any questions, to please pop them into the chat. While we're waiting for questions, Noel, I wondered if I've asked you this question before, I know, but how did it feel to be involved in such an exciting clinical trial for so long, but also the fact that it's leading on, it's like you said, it's had such a massive impact, and now you're on the cusp of launching a second major study as well. Like, how does it feel to be such, a key part of such a major success?
Well, it's a great privilege. I think that's the first thing to say. I suppose the second thing is one gets a feeling of imposter syndrome, that this has happened, because right at the start, it was such a revolutionary idea in cancer trial terms. We had a lot of people who said, well, this won't work. And we thought, well, it may not work. But we went through a whole series of trial startups, if you will, checking the toxicity, making sure we could recruit and so on. And then it really started to gather momentum, and everybody got behind it. And by everybody, I mean the clinicians and healthcare workers in the hospitals and the patients, who very willingly joined in a trial. And we had to say, well, we don't know whether this is going to do any good or not, but we intend to find out. And you need a bit of luck as well, I think. And so here we are. And yeah, it's a great privilege.
Well, isn't luck being something about being at the right place at the right time, and just maybe being the right bar at the right conference?
Oh, yes. And as someone who's been going to conferences for many, many years and seen many trials start and fail, to have one which has been so successful and serially successful has been really quite remarkable. And the gratifying thing, I suppose, is that the design of STAMPEDE has led to trials not just in cancer, but in infectious diseases and a variety of other diseases. That design will endure. It was a real landmark.
Yeah. Thank you, Noel. We do have a question from Amy. The question, Amy Rylands, do you think that there were particular factors that helped build trust in the trial?
Well, I think there were a few things coming together at the same time. One was the knowledge that we really needed to do better with prostate cancer, and that we were way behind the research field in breast cancer. The second thing was that at the time, we had there'd just been published a major trial showing that chemotherapy actually did work and advanced prostate cancer. We felt that we should move it upstream right at the start of the diagnosis to see if it would work in that setting. I think the third major factor was the national government plan to include cancer research as a fundamentally important element of how patients were treated. And that put resources into hospitals. We couldn't have done it without that. And I think that turned the UK into one of the world's leading cancer research countries, which is still the envy of the US and parts of Europe, where I was also involved in setting up trials in Europe at the time, and we could never get them off the ground in the way we did with STAMPEDE. So I guess we were a bit lucky.
I don't think it's luck, Noel, but okay. We'll agree to disagree. Thank you, Noel. I think just for the interesting time, I think we're going to move on. And I'm really grateful now to Stephen, who's our next speaker. And he's going to give the patient voice, because Stephen took part in STAMPEDE. And again, I don't want to steal any of Stephen's thunder, so I'll hand over to you now, Stephen, if that's okay. You okay to come off mute?
It's off. Okay.
There you are. Over to you, Stephen.
Okay. Well, I'm Stephen Shaw, a 65-year-old gentleman which was diagnosed with stage 3 prostate cancer in 2019, in May of 2019, with a Gleason score of a 5 and a 3. That meant to me nothing until I sat and listened to Mr. Chadwick, my oncology, and explained what the meaning was, that it was fast growing on one side and it was a serious cancer. At the time, it was very hard to take it in. I sat and listened to people that it was very fuzzy in my head. I'm glad I got my wife there, and I'm glad I got people around me who, you know, the nurses and people out who's actually explained it better with Mr. Chadwick at the time. So we went ahead, and I was invited to go with the Stampede trial, but I had to pass a certain medical things with this, a few tests, which I was told, you know, should be passed. And my treatment started after I was booked in for 6 sessions of chemotherapy with is it Doxatel, and 37 sessions of radiotherapy. But during that period of 2 years 9 months with the I don't know how to pronounce it sometimes, transdermal patches, which I started off with 4 on my back and down to 3, which to lower the testosterone. My thing with the chemotherapy, I got to my 5th cycle, and my wife said, "Are you going to speak to Miss Chadwick about the feelings in your toes and your fingers?" And when we was going into the hospital, I really didn't want to speak to him about it. I was thinking, well, if I got to have 6 sessions, I want to have the best chance of survival if it was 6 sessions. And lo and behold, my wife brought up at the meeting and said to Miss Chadwick, "Stephen needs to tell you about what he's experiencing." And so he decided that he'd have to cut the 6th cycle because of the neuropathy I was suffering with. And so that's where I was with that. I came out of that meeting feeling very deflated, thinking, you know, have I gotten the best chance of life? You know, this 1 extra cycle would have been, you know, did it make all the big difference? Then I started on the 37 sessions of radiotherapy in January the 8th of 2020, and I finished on the 28th of February 2020, which are 37 cycles of radiotherapy. And bearing in mind, I was also with the patches. My life in those 3 years was a struggle. It was like hitting a wall. Most days I'll get out of bed in the morning, as I was explaining to a lot of people, getting out of bed in the morning and you feel tired, but I got myself up, I carried on working, I worked part-time for myself. But coming mid-morning, it was like every day I was hitting a wall. That's because my testosterone level was down. And it's very hard, you know, every time I went to a meeting with Mr. Chadwick, he asked me how I was, where I was with it, what did I think about it. A couple of times with the patches, he says to me, "Do you want to give up on it?" I said no, because, you know, going back to the thing, I wanted to have the best chance of survival and going through. But my outlook on the Stampede trial and being with it, as Mr. Clark said early on, the people surrounding that in the Nottingham City Hospital, what I've been dealing with, they've been actually fantastic. The research team, they've guided me through things where I suffered a lot with some bowel issues as well, just after I stopped the radiotherapy. That eventually went away, but it's also caused a lot of how can I put it, embarrassment, a little bit of embarrassment with it. You know, your family, you've got to sit with your family and explain this is going to happen, you know, and all the things that I was in charge of, I was no longer in charge of for the foreseeable future until we finished on the trial. But I was on a 3-monthly PSA checks. I went on to 6 monthly checks as last July, which is 2023. And my first 6-month check, my PSA level was 0.7, and my testosterone level then was 22. My latest status as we sit today on the 25th of January 2024, my PSA now is 0.4 and my testosterone level is 22.3. I do feel I got my strength back. but I am suffering with side effects of the treatment. And whether or not, you know, I'm trying at the moment in time with different formulations for the neuropathy. And I'm hoping to see where it goes. My oncologist has got involved with my own doctors to try and see where we can go with this, because it is, if I'm being brutal honest, it is debilitating at night times when you come home, and my feet are absolutely, I try to explain to people, it's like a burning pain coming up through my feet into the back of my calves. And everything I've tried, you know, I've tried the old-fashioned water bottle, sitting with feet on a water bottle. I've tried different things myself, and I'm having, at this moment in time, not much luck of this, what I'm suffering with. So, but I, you know, if somebody said to me, would I go for all this trial again? Yes, I'd grab the chance tomorrow to go back through the same trial, given the same diagnosis I was given there, and know more about it now than what I did, because it's a very, at the time it was very frightening, but knowing now what I know now, and thinking that with the care and the diligence of the people around me, it's been fantastic, you know, to get to where I am today. And 5 years on, and my next, I'm looking forward, no, not looking forward to July, but I think July, then I'll, if everything comes back properly again, then I go into another year, onto a yearly checks. So I'd like to say I'm living proof that there's, you know, with all the right medication and treatment, there is life with prostate cancer. Okay. Thank
you for sharing, Stephen, and for being so honest and open. We really appreciate you sharing your story with us. Again, just a reminder for people on the call, if you want to put a question to Stephen, please pop it in the chat. While we're waiting for people to have a think, I wondered if you could say a word or two about what it feels like to be part of such a big trial. I know, you know, put up, you know, there's thousands of men that have taken part in this, and
it's fantastic. You know, when I talk to people about that, I was given the opportunity, and I always say I was given an opportunity to join the Stampede trial. And when I first did, when I was in Dr. Chadwick's office, when he said, I want to go to the Stampede, and I wonder what he meant by the Stampede trial, and to be given the chance, and then the follow-ups with it, you know. And then when I was sitting talking to people in the radio, when I go for radiation, and then at times, and these people wasn't on this, and say, why did you get onto this? And I couldn't really answer them. I just given the opportunity to go on this, and I think the trial and what I've seen of the trial, because I've done a bit of research myself, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I try not to read too much, because, you know, I don't, with Mr. Clark talking about toxicity and that, things like goes over my head, but I have tried in the past to fully understand. It was only last week, and I must say, when Mr. Clark mentioned this, I think, or Ashwin mentioned the fact that the patches, which I didn't know, and I did look up the fact that when they was on, it's like slow releasing, so it's not so impact on the liver. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'd not crossed that bridge. I mean, Mr. Chadwick would have probably told me if I'd asked that question, but I hadn't asked that question until I heard that last week. That's something else I've heard. So yeah, being part of the Stampede trial, and I'd like to have a word with Mr. Clark and Ashwin later on when we finished about Stampede 2, to be quite honest with you.
I'm sure they'll be keen to talk about it. Absolutely. I think, just in the interest of time, I think we've caught back up now. So I can't see any questions in the chat. So thank you again, Stephen. And again, we will have some, if you've got time, some more Q&As at the end. But if we can move on to Ashwin Sachdeva. Thank you very much for joining us, Ashwin. Ashwin's going to talk a little bit more about Stampede and life expectancy and the impact of side effects, and what can be done about those. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Ashwin. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm sorry, Ashwin, you're on mute. There you are.
Great. Thanks, Haley, and thanks for the invitation and this opportunity for us to talk about the work we've been doing as one of the many things that have come out of the STAMPEDE trial beyond just its original aims of seeing which treatments can help improve survival in patients with prostate cancer. So I'll take you perhaps outside of the trial setting for a minute and just show where we've got to in the real world with survival from survival amongst patients with metastatic prostate cancer. And this is just some data from the US in a real world population, where gradually over time there's a trend towards patients living slightly longer following a diagnosis of metastatic prostate cancer, and this captures all comers, with patients across all ages, across various from various backgrounds and various areas of deprivation, etc., and also different types of treatment that patients have received. And if we put this into context in terms of the sort of treatments that are now available as a consequence of trials such as the STAMPEDE trial, and look to some UK data, we find that about 21,000 patients are being diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer in the UK, and about half of these patients receive some form of systemic treatment in addition to their hormone treatment, like what Stephen mentioned earlier. This access to such treatments have emerged from the work done within the STAMPEDE trial, though these additional treatments themselves lead to improvements in survival, and as I'll come to later on, also come with the risk of side effects. So just looking through how things have moved on during the course of the STAMPEDE trial, a number of treatments such as docetaxel, which Stephen received, radiotherapy to the prostate, even amongst patients who've had disease spread beyond the prostate, so metastatic disease, and abiraterone. Across the majority of these comparisons, there's a very clear improvement in survival amongst patients who received these experimental therapies, and so much so that patients are living substantially longer than the initial period of about 42 months that you might have seen prior to the inception of the trial and in the early stages of it, whereby men with lower volume metastatic disease might be living on average about 100 months, which translates to about 8.5 years, which is far from the initial 3.5-year median or average survival, where about half the patients would still be alive, particularly low volume disease. And also there have been improvements in high volume disease. And as men live longer, we need to be cognizant of the fact that their testosterone levels remain suppressed longer. And these can lead to a number of different side effects. And I would add that this is slightly different from the patch trial or the transdermal estradiol comparison that Stephen was on, where the aim of this was to avoid testosterone suppression. And I'm pleased to see his testosterone levels are still detectable, and hopefully he doesn't encounter any of these side effects. But these could include things like weakening of the bones or osteoporosis leading to fractures, changes in body composition where you might lose your muscle mass and have weight gain because of increase in fat, and also these together with other factors contributing to increased risk of cardiovascular toxicity such as heart attacks, which can lead to non-cancer related mortality, so death from a reason other than cancer, and all of these can impact quality of life. So in the STAMPEDE biomedical imaging group, we've been looking to see if we can learn more from the scans performed on patients as part of their routine care. This has been used either to look at patients having either low or high volume disease and whether that leads to a response to treatment or toxicity, which I'll come to in a moment. So this work is quite a substantial effort, and we're very thankful to the number of over 110 UK sites that have contributed to this, whereby we work together with the Clinical Trials Unit from our centre at the Christie, and also with the Clinical Trials Unit and NHS Digital to access long-term outcome data in patients and put these together with anonymised scans from patients on the trial. And so far, we've been reasonably successful in bringing in the majority of scans and patients across multiple comparisons within this trial through the efforts of quite a few people. This has resulted in us being able to initially divide patients into low and high volume disease, and demonstrated quite uniquely, and the first in the world to do so, that radiotherapy to the prostate in patients with low volume disease is beneficial, but not amongst patients with high volume disease. And this has changed international practice. So now moving across to what else we're looking to do and have started to do with these scans, we're looking to understand toxicities, such as those that I mentioned earlier. And the unique design of the STAMPEDE trial and its linkage with hospital outcome data, as Noel mentioned initially, gives us an opportunity to see whether these treatments can either increase the risk or decrease the risk of some of these side effects. In the initial part of the trial, we were testing zoledronic acid, which is known to protect the bones from developing osteoporosis, and therefore the feeling was this could reduce fracture risk, as well as perhaps reducing the progressing. And then we look to intensify hormone deprivation with the use of abiraterone, and in the latter part of the trial we're looking to see what we can do to reduce these side effects, such as by the use of metformin or the estradiol patch. This is particularly important in men with prostate cancer who, even at diagnosis before the start of any treatment, have weaker bones and have an increased risk of having osteoporosis. And this is worsened further with the use of androgen deprivation therapy or hormone therapy, as shown by the study here, where the fracture risk in patients was about half of the patients would have had a fracture by about 8 years in this particular study. And the greatest loss in the bone mineral density or the bone strength perhaps occurs within the first year of starting hormone treatment. So we look to see if we can link the data for the STAMPEDE trial patients with that collected as part of their routine care. So if you attend hospital for any reason, and especially if you get admitted, your diagnoses during those admissions are recorded as part of a standard NHS care, and we've managed to access these data and link these back to participants on the STAMPEDE trial. We look to answer the first question here, was whether what is the true long-term incidence of fractures or significant fractures requiring hospitalizations with hormone therapy alone, and whether zoledronic acid might reduce this fracture event rate in patients being started for hormone treatment at the same time. Through reasonable linkage, we were able to study this taking the unique design of the STAMPEDE trial itself, where patients either received hormone therapy with zoledronic acid, or hormone therapy with docetaxel, or a combination of the two, zoledronic acid and docetaxel. The dose of zoledronic acid here was higher than we'd routinely give for bone protection alone, but it was considered that a higher dose could perhaps suppress cancer progression, which turned out not to be the case. So this was a unique opportunity for us to see whether, if it doesn't suppress cancer progression, could it reduce fracture risks? And it was found to be that the case that in patients with metastatic disease, there was quite a substantial reduction in fracture risk. So about 25% of patients had fewer fractures, 25% fewer patients had fractures by 10 years of follow-up if they had metastatic disease. And the number was perhaps slightly lower in patients who did not have metastatic disease, but had aggressive prostate cancer nevertheless. And side effects associated with zoledronic acid were reasonably low, with about 3% of patients with this higher dose of zoledronic acid sustaining osteonecrosis of the jaw. This suggests that perhaps we should be considering bone protection for all men being diagnosed newly with metastatic prostate cancer. And maybe we need a more of a risk stratified approach to find those without metastatic disease who may be at increased risk for developing a fracture in the future. And one particular way to do this is through the FRAX algorithm developed by the team at Sheffield, which when we applied to our cohort, we found that only 2% of patients would have met the criteria for recommending a bone protection agent. And we found that across the board, this was not particularly applicable in STAMPEDE trial patients, with only a small proportion being identified to benefit from bone protection agents in this particular setting, suggesting that we might need to look at other ways of identifying those most likely to benefit from bone protection, such as the use of their baseline staging CT scans, which gives us very useful information. And in collaboration with the team at Sheffield, who have developed an algorithm to measure bone strength. So they take a CT scan and generate a 3D segment of the bone of the proximal femur, and see whether they could simulate different types of falls to see what amount of force would be required to cause this to fracture. And the CT scans have quite a lot of valuable information, which can be extracted relatively easily through advanced imaging software, which when applied to these scans can be used to get information such as how strong these bones are, or bone density, using reasonably automated ways, and perhaps also looking at area of muscle to see if muscle area seems to reduce with advancing age. In this particular bit of work, which showed that as men get older, they have a lower muscle area or develop sarcopenia. And we're now looking to see whether we can evaluate the effects of different treatments in such a way as well. We know that standard ADT leads to loss of muscle mass as early as 6 months of starting treatment. And here, 3 CT scans from the same patient showing this area in purple, which marks the muscle area, reducing in area as this patient was followed up to 5 years of age, 5 years following their initiation of treatment, and this is quite substantial in perhaps even beyond this period, which is what we're looking to study now. And this leads us to the next question of whether these additional new therapies, such as these ARSIs like abiraterone and enzalutamide, might increase the risk of falls and fractures beyond that from just standard hormone therapy alone. And so we undertook this systematic review recently published in European Urology Oncology, which showed that the fracture rate and the fall rate is more than doubled amongst these patients. And similarly, we look to understand whether there might also be an effect on cardiovascular toxicity as an increased risk of heart attacks, as we know that non-cancer related deaths appears to be higher amongst the long-term survivors with metastatic prostate cancer, and perhaps even greater risk amongst those who had a cardiovascular disease diagnosis at their initial initiation of ARSI therapy. So we look to understand by evaluating existing data whether the use of novel prostate cancer therapies might further increase the risk of cardiovascular events. And this systematic review from 24 trials and about 22,000 participants was conducted, which found that 37% of patients had a adverse event associated with the introduction of an ARSI versus 22% without, and 16% had a high-grade cardiovascular event, together suggesting that the risk of cardiovascular events approximately doubles with the addition of an androgen receptor signaling inhibitor such as abiraterone, enzalutamide, darolutamide, or apalutamide. And when we look to see what types of events occur, these are largely the development of hypertension amongst these patients with the initiation of an ARSI, though there is also an increased risk of other events such as myocardial infarction, dysrhythmias, strokes, and cardiovascular death, which also appears to be doubled in risk following the introduction of such an additional agent. So we're now looking to see whether we can use those same imaging scans, as I mentioned earlier, to identify features within patients which might help us predict who is likely to have develop a cardiovascular event in the future, which will help in deciding what might be the most appropriate way of managing patients who are newly diagnosed with metastatic cancer and counseling them about the risks associated with various therapies in their particular situation. And this brings us to wonder what we can do to minimize these ADT-related side effects, which could include potential ideas such as the use of intermittent hormone therapy, exercise interventions, dietary interventions, perhaps replacing standard hormone therapy with estradiol patch, such as what Steve was randomized to receive within the STAMPEDE trial, or looking at other treatments such as metformin, or perhaps de-escalating the intensive therapies we might offer these patients. And the STAMPEDE metformin trial, importantly, has been recruiting for a number of years now and completed its recruitment of about 3,100 patients in March last year. And I'm pleased to say that we might be reporting these results later on this year to see whether metformin might help us either improve survival overall or reduce some of these side effects associated with hormone therapy. And there are a number of different mechanisms to support both hypotheses for whether it might lead to improved oncological outcomes or improve survivorship by reducing the side effects of hormone therapy in patients with prostate cancer. So kindly funded by the Prostate Cancer UK, we're also undertaking a sub-study, so a subset of patients on the metformin trial, of which there are about 141, are being monitored for at least a 2-year period to collect their blood samples to see how how their physiology and metabolism might change with the addition of metformin. And we'll also be looking at their imaging data and routinely collected hospital data to link these together, and look forward to reporting these in the coming years. So thank you very much for a whole host of people who've been involved with this, most notably the chief investigators who set up this study and various other members of the team such as Craig Jones and Omar El Taji, who are on this call today, who have helped deliver this data that I presented today, and the various collaborators across the country and the world. And most importantly, our patients who have contributed their data, their scans, their time to such initiatives such as the STAMPEDE trial, allowing us to study prostate cancer in greater depth, such as what I've reported here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashwin. That was a really amazing presentation. Again, people that are on the call, please feel free to add a question to the chat. But while you're doing that, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask you, Ashwin, particularly in terms of the data that you have around fractures and bone density, with that data that you have, what's the next steps? What do you need to do for, to encourage men to take, is it zoledronic acid to help prevent fractures, or which men to take?
So zoledronic acid is available to men with metastatic prostate cancer starting lifelong ADT at present. However, the EAU guidelines, European guidelines, recommend that this should be done in a risk stratified manner, which often tends to be a barrier in our experience, where you might require additional scans before patients can be started on such treatments. So we hope that our data would help demonstrate that patients across the board with metastatic prostate cancer might benefit from zoledronic acid. And the next steps here are to also understand whether these data, which were done amongst patients only receiving standard ADT, whether are also apply in a setting where patients are now receiving, at least half the patients are now receiving ADT in addition to an androgen receptor signaling inhibitor. So we look forward to reporting some of those results at the EAU meeting later this year, and there'd be a lot more imaging-based, biomarker-based approaches to stratify patients to see who would benefit most from zoledronic acid in the future.
Fantastic, thank you. It's exciting to see so much data about to be published and presented in 2024. Sounds like a very exciting year. Thank you. I have one question. So from Joe Walcott, from what you've outlined, is there one principal thing a urology team should take away and implement?
So if I could suggest 3, because numbers, 3 is the magic number. One being recruitment to clinical trials is important both for patients within them and the institution overall to drive improvements in how we manage patients. And we're extremely grateful for patients who donate their time and tissues and data to support that. The second, so I would suggest that urology teams should consider recruiting to trials where possible. Secondly, we need to be cognizant of the fact that any of these treatments that we offer patients, either in a trial or off trial, they have side effects. And as Stephen mentioned, these can be extremely impactful on their quality of life. So we should follow patients both for their cancer and by looking at their PSA results, but perhaps we should also be taking extra care to follow the side effects. And thirdly, prevention is better than cure. So if there are interventions which can help avoid these side effects altogether, then they should certainly be considered and offered to patients early.
Thank you. The questions are starting to come in.
If I may, Hayley, could I just ask?
Absolutely.
Each urologist and urology nurse in a department should remember that a patient is an individual and they have to be treated as such. So it's important to think about what's best for an individual. And that treatment might vary a bit, as we have shown, and the way in which their condition is handled, as Steve has so eloquently told us, is vitally important. We have to keep listening and we have to keep thinking.
Yeah, thank you. We've got another question from Amy Rylance. We often hear of exercise as a wonder drug that can slow progression, ease side effects, etc. But patients with fracture risk are often advised against exercise. So how do we overcome that kind of conflict, that issue between?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to my final point there, that prevention is better than cure. So the patients, the exercise interventions being offered once patients are at increased risk of fracture already is a bit too late. We should be advising patients of exercise early in their disease course, and particularly at the start of hormone therapy.
Thank you. I think that we've run out of time. Can I just take this opportunity to thank all speakers? Thank you, Noel. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Ashwin, for brilliant talks and presentations this evening. Thank you to everyone who attended for your presence and for listening. We have just dropped the surveys into the chat, so please, I urge you to take part in those surveys, because that's the only way we're going to improve these and keep these relevant for you as an audience. So with that, thank you very much, and have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.